This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly.
Okay, so I can see us there. So, folks, everybody's welcome to this afternoon's Executive Office Committee. If we could start with apologies. Clerk, do we have any apologies at all, Michael?
None, Chair.
At the moment, okay, that's grand. In terms of item 2, Chairperson's business, the only item that I had, although I see that he's not here, was to take the opportunity to congratulate the Vice Chair, Deputy Chair Doug Beattie on becoming leader of the Ulster Unionist Party. Maybe if Doug joins us at some point later in the meeting, we'll be able to pass on those good wishes to him at that stage. If we move on then to item 3, the draft minutes, they are in the meeting packet, page 6. Are members content that they are a true reflection of the proceedings from last week? Okay, that's grand. So that's them sorted. Then in terms of item 4, matters arising, maybe just to say that at our meeting last week, we did discuss the possibilities of inviting the EU Vice President, Maros Sefcovic, and Lord Frost to attend the committee to deal with some of the issues that we had. But that was not agreed just because there was a technical problem at that point. So what I'm actually just seeking is agreement that we invite those guys to the meeting. So would people be happy enough for that?
Yes.
Yeah, I think there was agreement to it last week, but we just didn't get the official bit of doing that. So that certainly helps us to be able to do that. We also need agreement to write to the Finance Committee about the spending plan of the department, which was presented to us last week, and we did reach a couple of conclusions in that, but just to seek agreement to table those issues that we had raised to the Finance Committee. Would members be happy?
Great.
Yep. Okay, thank you. And then finally, just agreement to write to the Economy Committee about the impact upon businesses to date by the protocol and just ways to move forward. Just to bring people back, do you remember that we had a meeting with the Joint EU Committee in the Oireachtas, and what they had suggested was that we should engage with businesses that they would be keen to hear, and we agreed that we would be keen to hear some of the experiences of businesses and some of the opportunities that are available to them at the moment. But obviously business is within the realms of the Economy Committee, so it's just a right to them to ask if they've done any work on this already and how we could dovetail that into what we would be doing going forward. So would there be agreement just to check in with the Economy Department on that?
Great.
Okay, then that quickly has got us on to item 5, which is the Historical Institutional Abuse. It's an oral evidence session from the Victims and Survivors Service. Members on pages 16 to 22 of the meeting pack are the relevant papers. If we could bring into the meeting Margaret Bitson and Oliver Wilkinson. That's the Chief Executive Officer of the Victim and Survivors Service and the Chair of the Victims and Survivors Service. And if we had, I think we have Margaret on the line maybe, or do we have her in oh, we have you in person as well. Yeah, okay. So Margaret, yourself and Oliver, you're very welcome to the committee. We appreciate you coming today to give us an update on the service and how it's been going in the past period in relation to the historical institutional abuse and what services have been offered. I'll maybe pass over to yourselves if you want to give us a bit of an introduction to how things have been going, and then we can open it up to questions after that.
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation to be here today to brief the committee on our work with survivors of historical institutional abuse. I am Oliver Wilkinson, the chair of the VSS, and I'm joined today with our Chief Executive, Margaret Bateson. We have provided you with a briefing paper on progress to date, and we're happy to respond to any questions that you have. But there are a few points that I'd like to bring to the committee's attention. The first is around the launch of this dedicated and specialist service. Victim and Survivor Service was appointed by the Executive Office on the 23rd of October 2020 to provide health and well-being support and services to survivors of historical institutional abuse. Now, I'd like to thank our staff for their commitment and hard work over that short period of about 6 weeks to get the service launched by the 1st of December 2020. I'd also like to thank the HIA groups who work closely with us and continue to work closely with us to make sure that we get this service right. We'll continue to be victim-centred in our approach and ensure that the service delivery model both drives and is driven by our own vision, which is to improve the health and well-being of victims and survivors. The second point is around the impact of COVID-19 on support and services. To date, COVID-19 has impacted on how support and services can be delivered, in particular, the social support and complementary therapies. It is also a challenge to start off a service providing things like welfare support and psychological therapies and do so remotely instead of face-to-face. As you can appreciate, this makes it much more difficult to build up that much needed trust and relationship. We're grateful for the continued patience and understanding of survivors through all this. I'm pleased to advise, however, that our offices will be open from the 24th of May later this month on an appointment basis, and that face-to-face support and services will be available from our community partners. We have Trauma Centre and Advice NI from that date. Thirdly, it might be useful to provide clarity on the types of support and service available and how these can be accessed. These services now include 2 health and well-being caseworkers who are available to discuss and assess individual needs and ensure access to specialist services, psychological therapies, complementary therapies, and social support, welfare support and advice, and finally opportunities to undertake personal development and training. If any survivor needs access to services, they can get that by contacting the Wave Trauma Centre, Advice NI, or the VSS, Victim and Survivor Service, directly. We are now all here to help. There are 2 areas of support that we are currently transitioning across from our colleagues in Corsica. The first is helping to record the survivor's lived experience. This may be for the purposes of a redress application, but equally, this could be for family, personal, or therapeutic use. This work had been carried out by the Interim Advocate's Office, but will now transition to VSS as part of the service delivery model. The second is around information retrieval. This is a particularly challenging area. Under the legislation, Corsica has the remit for information retrieval and will do so where there is, for example, a public interest case. Day-to-day information retrieval will form part of the VSS service delivery model over the coming weeks. Now, I'd like to finish with a comment on our commitment to learning and to the principles of co-design. We have provided some information in terms of 148 survivors who have come forward to VSS to date in terms of their initial needs. We are in the very early stages, but starting to capture information in this way provides important data and evidence to continue to shape and develop the services in the long term. Corporate governance and clinical governance frameworks also underpin the work of VSS and our community partners, supported by clear quality standards and a monitoring and evaluation framework which adopts an outcome-focused approach to every intervention. Fiona Ryan has recently started as Commissioner and will have a monitoring and oversight role of the support and services that we provide. Engagement to date with her has been very constructive, collaborative and survivor-centred. We look forward to working with Fiona as a critical friend over the months and the years ahead. And finally, learning from the lived experience of victims of survivors is equally as important and remains a key priority. We look forward to our continued engagement with survivors themselves to co-design our services. Their input to date has been invaluable. All of this will be an ongoing process for us. Working collectively, we know we can provide better support and services to survivors of historical institutional abuse. I'm happy to hand over, Chair, to any questions that the committee might have, most of which I presume Margaret will be able to address directly.
Okay, Oliver, thank you very much indeed for that and for that background information and for the very important role and work that the organisation does. And it's been really good to get the update. The committee, as I'm sure you will be aware, has taken a very keen interest in the area of historical institutional abuse from we got back together last January, and we have been conducting a series of discussions with all the various stakeholders within that. So we appreciate yourselves coming to us today. We engaged recently with a number of the sectoral groups, representative groups, of the victims and survivors, and we were listening to the things that they were saying. And some of the two points that I want to go to, the first is in relation to just how COVID cut across the service delivery. And I was wondering if you could tell us, was there any interactions between yourselves and the department to try and maintain service delivery and maybe to even have it deemed as essential or exempt from certain of the regulations so that that therapeutic and supportive work could continue during COVID?
Yeah, it might first of all be useful just to outline maybe the support and services that are available and then the impact of COVID on those. So the health and wellbeing services available, we look at health and wellbeing in the whole. So what the individual needs in terms of social support, psychological support and emotional support. So when we talk about health and wellbeing, we're talking about access to a health and wellbeing caseworker, to complementary therapies, to psychological therapies, and to pain management and physiotherapy, things like that. We also think about welfare and financial advice and the impact that that can have on your well-being. So when we say health and well-being, we mean welfare, advice and support as well. We also mean social support in terms of outreach, befriending, social isolation activities, and then finally personal development around training. And the impact on COVID of each of those is different. So for example, under psychological therapies, we were able to continue those remotely, either by telephone or by Zoom. And 32 individuals are engaged with a therapist and have been engaged with a therapist even during COVID. On the others, it's difficult because you're balancing government regulations alongside the professional regulations. So there were different periods of time, for example, where physiotherapy couldn't be provided according to the physiotherapist professional standards, or complementary therapies could not. So we didn't engage with the department in terms of, can we make these things exempt for every single intervention? We tried to act as fast as we could as different professional standards and different restrictions allowed, and we tried to do what we could. The two areas most impacted, without a doubt, were around social support. I mean, social support, even the words tell you, it needs social connection, and those social connections we know and the comfort come from face to face, and you can build a lot more trust and relationships face to face. So those will be starting up from next week in a local community setting, and likewise welfare advice was taking place really remotely and will start face to face. In terms of VSS and the offices, it was quite frustrating for us as well. We'd done a lot of engagement with the HIA groups throughout the summer, and some of those engagements we were able to do face-to-face, others on Zoom, and then we brought all of the HIA groups in to see the office and help us design it, what would a welcoming environment look like. And then if you remember, that was all happening at the end of November, ready for the big launch on the 1st of December. We were as excited as the HIA groups to open our doors, and then that was the last week where everything shut down again. So again, we couldn't physically open the doors. We had to go to remotely as well.
Okay, there were incredibly frustrating times for everybody right across all sectors, I suppose, is the key message. It wasn't just something here, it was all sectors were being restricted in the work that they could do. And look, finally for me, in terms of the groups and listening to them and working with them, there does seem to be a real pattern emerging that there are serious issues to do with mental health and addressing the mental health needs of those within the sector. Do you have like some sort of special measure that you're keeping a track specifically on that to make sure that you're addressing it, checking what the needs are, securing additional resources if needed, or bidding for additional resources? But it does seem to be one that's recurring from various sectors that we meet, saying that this is a substantial need.
Yeah. If you look at Annex 1 of the briefing paper, which outlines our service delivery model in terms of all the things that a person typically needs to maintain positive mental health and well-being, we have in place a 5-year business case. The business case is for about 1,500 interventions per year across all of those areas. We don't know yet until survivors start to really use the services, but we think of about 1,500 interventions. That will be for about 300 to 500 survivors, because some people will need more than, for example, that's the whole point of it. It's a holistic package of care. So someone may need physiotherapy combined with a psychological therapy, and then a few months later, something else. So we have monitoring and evaluation systems in place, and for psychological therapies, for example, it's called CoreNet, where the individual is asked at the start a range of questions about how they're feeling and any issues and difficulties they may have, and then that's asked at intervening points, usually at each session, and then at the end of the session, so that you're able to say, was this intervention effective? And if it's not, then you start looking at others. So for example, we're talking therapy doesn't work. Some people do find it still very difficult to verbalise the trauma. Then we look at alternatives around things like equine therapy, art therapy led by a therapist, and we just keep trying until we find the intervention that works for that person. So we focus on the outcome and whether it was effective or not for that individual, and if not, we try. So we will monitor that. That's a long term, because there's 32 people currently in psychological therapies, but no one has completed yet their sessions. And another interesting thing for the committee is normally the number of sessions, average number of sessions would maybe be 8 to 10 in VSS historically over the years. We're already seeing information come through from therapists that it looks like it's going to be a lot longer for survivors of HIA. And so again, we will report back things like that as we see them. And once we get to a position where we feel the business case is insufficient, we'll be flagging that at an early stage to the department.
And is that there, if you want to, instead of it being 8 to 10 as normal, if it took 15 to 20, the flexibility is there to be able to respond in that way?
It's a needs-based response where the focus is on the individual. So it's each individual will require different number of sessions and different interventions.
Okay, Margaret, that's good. That's good to hear that, and that flexibility is there. That's really important. So thank you for that. I'm going to pass over now to Doug Beattie, the Vice Chair, who is, there he is. Yeah, Doug, we'll pass over to yourself.
Chair, thank you very much, and Margaret and Oliver, thank you as ever for your evidence and answering questions. I mean, you're always a font of knowledge, which leaves me in awe. Can I just pick up on something that Colin raised, and that is, I mean, you're looking at roughly a circa of about 300 survivors that we're talking about here, but that could be up to 1,500 interventions. One of the big issues that we're getting feedback from is that many of those survivors are being re-traumatized by going through the redress process, and therefore there's a real chance that some of those people who you're dealing with now, once they go through the redress process, may be coming back to you over and over again because of that process in itself, with psychological issues. I mean, are you confident that you have the resilience for that, if that is the case? I mean, it's something we are trying to address in regards to the redress board, but just making sure you've got the resources if that was to suddenly increase over the coming sort of years. Have you got that resilience?
Well, in terms of how government and ALBs work, the business case that's signed off is for around 300 to 500 individuals, depending on how many interventions they'll need. We've certainly got a commitment from the officials in the Executive Office that this is one of the key priorities. And as soon as we see a difficulty with needs and demands, that we flag that at the earliest stage. At the moment, we have 148 survivors who have came forward, around 69 of them. We've been able to provide help and support directly through VSS, and then the other 79 are getting support through local and community organisations. So we monitor that weekly, and we formally monitor it and really drill down into the detail on a monthly basis, and we share that with Fiona, the Commissioner, and with the Executive Office, because it's really important in terms of maintaining that trust with victims and survivors. We don't currently have a waiting list. It's really important that we don't start building waiting lists.
And Margaret, can I just ask, and just on that, I mean, it seems to me that you are keeping statistics in regards to this. I mean, are you keeping statistics, for example, if you have an intervention with somebody and it's very positive, and then they go through the redress board and then they come back to you again because they've regressed in their treatment because of the redress process? Is that something you look at, or is it not something that's really sort of coming to light at the minute?
It isn't coming to light at the minute, but it should, because in terms of the roles and responsibilities and who's delivering services, we see ourselves with the redress board and the Commission as all delivering services. We're delivering health and wellbeing services. Redress is delivering a redress service, and the Commissioner's Office is delivering service in terms of making sure policy is right, speaking to government and promoting the interests. So we see it very much that it should be one systemic and integrated pathway for survivors. I would say at the moment we're all trying to get ourselves functioning, but certainly what we would like to see over the next number of months is that whole client pathway smoother and better amongst all three of us. And I think that includes, we shouldn't assume that people go through redress and be re-traumatised and then need treatment. It would be more important to think about how we prevent that re-traumatisation happening in the first place, so that they don't then need support and services from us. And that's the conversation I would like to start engaging in over the coming weeks and months.
Yes, and it's absolutely a conversation. It's just something I know the chair is very keen on as well. Just making sure that redress is, and we sort of aim off at the pass any issues with that. Can I just ask one last question, please, then, Margaret, and keep us straight on this? Maybe I should know this, but I'm not sure I do. You're going to be going through the documenting experiences to assist people for going through the redress board. Who owns that process? Who owns the storing of that documentation and that information and that data? Who owns the risk? And what happens when you go through this documentation of experiences if you suddenly come across something within that experience that you feel that there's a actionable criminal, something criminal within it that you can actually take action against? Is there processes in place for that?
Yeah, so the recording of the lived experience has up until now been taking place within the Interim Advocate's Office and then the Commissioner's Office. And I think when I met some of you one-to-one, I sort of flagged that was something that we were looking at with COSIGA in terms of where it should sit. So just in the last number of days and weeks, it's been determined by the Commissioner that really the recording of lived experience should be part of an integrated health and wellbeing model, and will sit and reside in the Victims and Survivors Service in terms of our service delivery model. In reality, what that'll look like when an individual comes forward is probably the health and wellbeing caseworker. We'll use that as the start of the client journey into health and wellbeing, to exploring what has happened to that person, what the impact has been on them, and then it's up to the survivor to choose what they do with that. So the information belongs to them, and it can be used either for, some people want to put their story into so that it makes more sense for them. It could be a tool in terms of sharing their story with their family, or it could be used for the redress process. And that's where we need to really find out what are the needs of the redress process versus the therapeutic needs of the individual, to try and make that a therapeutic process rather than a re-traumatized process. So in terms of who owns it, it's the individual survivor. It will be carried out by VSS. And sorry, what was the second part of that's going out of my mind? I'm sorry, around disclosure. Yeah. So the health and wellbeing case manager in VSS is a health professional with their own registration accreditation, and she has in place very clear disclosure processes and procedures in place in terms of reporting to police authorities, others, if a crime.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, next I'm going to bring Martina up into the spotlight and get some questions from her. So we'll pass over to yourself, Martina.
Can I thank you, particularly yourself, Margaret and Oliver, for all that you do. It's something that I think you realise that in this committee and further afield, it's deeply appreciated. Margaret, I was a bit surprised, and I have said this before when I seen the information on the business case about the scale of the number of people that you would be providing a service for, being 300 to 500, given that there have been thousands have actually gone through the historical institutional abuse, now institutions as we call it. So what you said about the officials telling you need to red flag to them in advance, are you satisfied that in so doing, that I know you said at the moment there's 148 engaging with you out of potentially maybe 300 or 500, but if that was to increase and the demand was to increase, will it be fast tracked? Because we all know what it takes around business cases and around trying to draw down funding. So is there a process put in place that in the event of the demand increasing, that you will not find yourself with more demand than what you can supply in terms of a service?
We did some stress testing, if you like, at the time, where we said for every 75 to 100 additional survivors who came forward, in the immediate term, we would need a caseworker for that. And that principle has been agreed with the department and by the department. I think in terms of how fast they're going to turn it around, I know Gareth's up after us, and I'm sure he can give you assurance that he will be turning it around quickly, and how critical and important it is that he does so. And I mentioned it earlier, if we start building waiting lists for survivors who have been waiting for years for these services, have built up courage to pick up the phone and call someone and contact someone, we have to be able to react quickly. It wouldn't be good enough to be putting people on waiting lists, and it's critical that there is that fast turnaround and delivery, and that we're ready if our capacity does need to be increased.
And can I ask you then, see the interventions, you talked about 1,500 interventions perhaps a year, and I believe the funding that you have something in the region of 600,000. Mm-hmm. So is that adequate funding for the scope of the service? Because it's very broad, and the range of options available are fantastic. Like they're very good. I was very impressed when I read the paper. But I was just wondering, does the funding match what you have, what the offering that you're supplying?
It does. We've costed out all each of those interventions. So, for example, it's 500 social support interventions, 100 psychological therapies, 100 complementary therapies, and so on. Each service has its own, and then the costings we've taken from that have been the average costs based on our existing client base over the last 5 or 6 years. So I suppose there is a risk that the average cost is different for survivors of HIA, so that risk is there. But certainly in terms of a reasonable, balanced approach, it seems that the 600,000 is sufficient for the 1,500 interventions. It's if we need to deliver more, then we'll need more.
Okay, that's good to hear that. One last question, because I know there's other members looking to get in here. Are there counsellors available who specialise in childhood sexual abuse? As you know, I had been a junior minister who had been involved in the establishment of historical institution abuse, so I'm acutely aware of what some of the needs would be. And when I was looking at what you were offering, I was wondering, just is that part of what you provide?
Yeah, so there are 27 therapists who are experienced in childhood abuse, sexual, emotional, physical and neglect. And 8 of those have been specifically chosen to work with survivors of HIA because of their higher levels of experience and qualifications. And we would hope over the coming months that 8 will increase to 14. And again, based on current demand, that's sufficient, but let's keep watching and monitoring.
Again, Margaret, Oliver, thank you for everything that you do. And I could ask you a load of questions, but I know other members are looking to get in. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that, Martin. I'm going to ask next for Pat to be brought up into the spotlight, and we can get Pat to ask his questions. So over to yourself, Pat.
Thanks, Colin, and thanks to Margaret and Oliver. I don't think I've ever seen you looking so well, Oliver, with your shirt and tie on. First time I've ever seen you with a tie.
Especially for you.
Thank you. I have one question with a few parts in it, and it relates to relationships with the Redress Board. And when Fiona Ryan was in with the committee a few weeks back, she suggested that a direct link should be established between victims and survivors and the Redress Board. So, first of all, I'm just wondering, have you any information about whether that has been established or not? Second, go ahead, sure, answer that one.
I think I'd rather wait in your sub-questions before answer.
I'm just wondering what the relationship is between your own organisation, Margaret, and the Redress Board as well.
I think I alluded to it earlier that the 3 organisations providing and delivering services have very much focused on getting themselves up and operational. And now's the time we really need to work together to make sure there's one client journey, that there's not one process for redress, one for VSS and one for COSICA. So in direct response to the questions, there isn't really a direct relationship between VSS and redress at the moment, but we would be hopeful that there will be over the coming weeks.
And sorry, Margaret, for interrupting you. Have you been asked by victims and survivors to intervene with the Redress Board on their behalf at any time? Our health and wellbeing case manager does hear victims and survivors talking about their dissatisfaction with the Redress Board, but I think we need to be really clear on roles and responsibilities. I know the Executive Office and COSICA are engaged with the Redress Board in terms of putting plans in place, in terms of improvements going forward. And I don't think it would be useful for VSS, to weigh in on top of that, but we're certainly part of the discussions with COSICA and the Executive Office on that. Okay, and you don't know whether a direct line has been established between victims and survivors and the Redress Board? Are you saying that hasn't happened?
I don't believe that has happened.
Right.
And I'd expect Gareth Johnson from the department would have more information on exactly what's happening.
Yeah, and it's a question we're going to ask Gareth, and probably one of the other questions I would want to ask him would be about conversations with the institutions, between TEO officials and the institutions. But that's probably beyond your remit, I presume.
It is.
Just one other question I wanted to ask you on. In your briefing paper, you mentioned information recovery. Could you expand on that a bit for us?
Yeah, I think it's going to be something that's going to be really complex and challenging. And again, like recording the lived experience, information recovery is set out under the legislation as being under the remit of COSICA, the Commissioner's Office. And again, it's been something that we've been talking to Fiona and her team on since she came into post, in terms of should it be separate or should it be part of an integrated model. So just in the last number of weeks, we've agreed that any information retrieval and recovery that maybe has a large public interest will still reside with the Commissioner's Office. But day-to-day information retrieval, so for example, if a survivor is speaking to a caseworker about their needs and they need a piece of information, then the health and wellbeing caseworker would go and get that, because it doesn't make sense to be constantly transferring survivors from one organisation to another. Where we see serious issues and themes and patterns emerging, so for example, missing information or destroyed information, or information that should be available under law that is not, or not forthcoming, then they're the types of big themes and patterns we would be reporting back to the Commissioner. So day to day, we would be retrieving the information on behalf of the survivor, whatever they ask, and then any big issues we would be reporting back to the Commissioner's Office. So we will start that from the 1st of June. It's not yet in place, and we're still just working over the next few weeks in the finer detail of that with the Commissioner's Office.
And have you encountered any difficulties to date in recovering some of that information?
We haven't. VSS hasn't started it yet. We'll take it on from the 1st of June.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Pat. And Oliver, maybe whenever you're back up next, we'll see if Pat gets a tie on him as well for that meeting. You'll be able to return that compliment to him there. I'm going to ask for Trevor to come up into the spotlight now, and we can ask Trevor to start his questions. Trevor.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Margaret and Oliver, for your presentation. It's been very interesting. My questions really have been answered. I wanted to ask you about resourcing and budget in particular. Because I would think that from next Monday you're going to have a bigger influx of applications for guidance and for treatment. Are you reasonably satisfied you can cope this year on a budget of £600,000?
That's a difficult question to say that you're satisfied. We're satisfied right now that we're coping. We're satisfied right now that there's no waiting lists. But there's a number of things that could increase that, but we would hope to be doing that in a very planned and considered way. So, for example, in building better relationships with the Redress Board and seeing what the client journey should be and how we in VSS can improve that then might generate more individuals being referred to us. And the second area is around the apology that the Executive Office are working on with the Commissioner. And again, if there's communication, media, PR around an apology, we would also expect a significant increase in demand. But for both of those areas, we want to do it in a planned way. So we want to plan it out, look at what the increase in demand should be, and then we're very likely this year going to be going back to the Executive Office and asking for additional resources for that.
Yeah, well, you just answered my second question, Margaret. You do have the facility, if necessary, to go back to the department for extra funding in year, rather than having to try and regulate the flow of clients that you might receive.
But we've been given that assurance,
right.
And I think then that's something that you can interrogate the officials on after us.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much. That's grand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. I just want to check if George is with us, George Robinson, just to see if maybe George has any questions he would like to ask. We'll just pop your wee mic on there for us, George.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just joined very recently, and was given the wrong ID as well, so I couldn't get in from the very beginning, unfortunately. I have no questions
Okay.
at the moment. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, George, not a problem. Well, look, Margaret and Oliver, that seems to be all of the questions at this stage. So can I thank both of you for your attendance with us today and giving us the update. It's been incredibly challenging times with COVID, and you're undertaking very sensitive and difficult work. But we certainly can take assurances that you're doing that to the best of your abilities in the times that we're in. I know that hopefully from next week, whenever there's a few more relaxations, that will allow some more of your face-to-face work to take place. And I know that will be welcomed by those in the sector, and wish you and the staff team the best for that. Just finally, before I go, I'm going to bring Emma Sheeran in, because I know sometimes Emma has a difficulty with the hand. I'm not going to say the hand gesture, because we could go anywhere with that one. But I know I know that you sometimes have to see you switched on there. So Emma, pass to yourself for a quick question.
Thanks very much, Chair. Apologies, I was having issues trying to turn my mic and camera on there. No, I just thanks to both Oliver and Margaret for the presentation. And I know obviously we've had conversations about this before, and it's incredibly sensitive. I just wanted to know, because we're getting departmental officials in after this, and I know that the concerns around time and the length of time that it's taken for applications to make their way through for redress, and all the issues that have been touched on around face-to-face services and the impact of COVID. At the beginning of the year, we obviously had the release of the reports North and South into the Magdalen Laundries sort of institutional abuse, human rights abuse, just call it what you will. I wondered if there has been communication to yourselves from victims of those institutions, or if there is thought around including victims that may now come forward as a result of the release of those reports, and that sort of making the headlines, and what you would say about that.
Yeah, our current remit under HIA in terms of the support and services we've spoken about today are for those who were in children's homes between the years of 1922 and 1995, and currently doesn't include mother and baby institutions and Magdalen Laundries. And we're also an arm's length body of the Executive Office, so both HIA and Victims of the Troubles and Conflicts sit under the remit of the Executive Office. The mother and baby institutions and the Magdalen Laundries sit with health at the moment, and we have been engaged with health in terms of having in place some interim emotional support for those survivors who are going through the inquiry process at the moment. Where health are leading that and asking survivors what they need and want from an inquiry. And that interim support is limited to two things. One, it's a listening ear if anyone needs to give us a call or send us an email. And secondly, then, if someone does need access to a therapist, we will arrange that. Obviously, in terms of medium to longer term support, that's not sufficient. It's nothing like what we've been talking about today. I'm meeting health on Monday. They're aware of our service delivery model. I think it's really important that the survivors of mother and baby institutions and the Magdalen Laundries are involved in some sort of a co-design process around their own support and services. I'd be wary about just saying we can deliver these for you. So it's trying to balance the urgent need for support and services with, I think we can do both. I think there's an urgent need, but I think over the coming weeks and months, we can also engage with those survivors and get their input into what those support and services should look like. But at the moment, that's sitting with health, which complicates it a little bit, but it's not insurmountable. And we're really keen to be involved and share our experience in that area. And can I just finish with one point, Chair, if that's okay? Because earlier just reminded me in terms of the demands, and just your question there reminded me around some of the gaps even within historical institutional abuse around the transgenerational impact. And at the moment, we provide services directly to the survivor themselves, but thinking around carers and family members and that has been raised as a potential gap. And then I know, and it could be similar here around HIA survivors having paid for the funeral of other survivors, and whilst it's slightly outside of the remit of a health and wellbeing service, that's pretty difficult to hear from a survivor, and we really need to look and see if there's any way, any mechanisms that we can put in place collectively to make sure that doesn't happen.
Okay, are you happy with that, Emma?
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. I suppose, I don't know if as a committee, if there's any scope for us to sort of reach out to the health committee or the health minister because I understand obviously Magdalene Laundries is sitting under health, but with sort of cross-departmental responsibility or commitment there. And obviously your organisation has got, people that are trained in dealing with people that have undergone trauma and dealing with people in those sort of situations in a sensitive manner. And to me, it would make sense to, maybe broaden that out. I understand what you're saying around like commitments to say that you could deal with all in the capacity and all of that. And obviously the current redress scheme is already under severe pressure, but just thinking of a way that we could all work collaboratively to ensure that all victims are getting sort of the service that they need, and not ostracising anyone, people that have already been ostracised by institutions. So thank you very much, Margaret, and thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Emma. Okay, Margaret and Oliver, thank you very much. Then we can conclude there. Thank you for your time today, and we will no doubt catch up with you again maybe before the end of the year, but thank you very much indeed.
Okay,
thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, members, we're slightly before ahead of time, but maybe we could possibly park. I think there was a reasonable suggestion there about the transgenerational impact on survivors, and that might be something that if we don't get that fleshed out during the next session, we maybe could write to somebody, be it the commissioner or otherwise, afterwards to sort of see if some work is being done on that. It might be a point. Is there any other issues that people see raised from that? Okay, that's grand. Then I think we certainly have Alison and Gareth present for the next section, which is the oral evidence session from the departmental officials. Maybe if we could bring Alison and Gareth up into the spotlight and check with them if they might be ready to go at this stage or if they might need a few minutes.
Happy to go, Chair, and Roberta is connected in as well, Roberta Dalton.
Okay, that's grand. Well then, look, if we've got yourselves there, then what we can do, Gareth, is pass over to yourself then to give us your the evidence update, and then we can move into some question and answers after that.
Certainly. And I'm happy to just take members through the paper and perhaps add a little gloss to it. In the paper that's been provided, we start by acknowledging why what we're talking about today is important. What the Hart Report said about the experiences of victims and survivors, that the lasting effect that has had on people, the role of publicly funded compensation payments, but that is really just part of the response and part of the answer. Very important part, but there are wider supports, wider reparation measures that need to be in place, and those are what we're talking about today. There was a specific recommendation in the Hart Report about the provision of specialist services, counselling services, practical help tailored to the individual needs of victims and survivors. As you will have heard, the HIA Support Service launched on the 1st of December, delivered through the Victims and Survivors Service, and I don't propose to cover a lot of ground that colleagues from VSS have already covered, but the paper notes the range of services and some of the latest numbers of people who have been accessing those. As the committee's been exploring, the COVID restrictions did mean that the full range of services weren't immediately available, but that is growing, and the likes of complementary therapies, which a number of victims and survivors have found very helpful, are now starting to be available again. That has been a very significant start for the service, and I heard the committee rightly paying tribute to VSS for the very quick work to get things up and running, and recalling too that the interim advocate was very involved in the design. The groups of victims and survivors themselves contributed very much to the co-design of those services, and of course latterly the Commissioner has been very much involved. So it has been a very good start, but there is certainly more that we can do and continue to develop, and the advice of the Commissioner in ensuring that services evolve to meet emerging needs will be very important. There's been one of those that's just been highlighted around transgenerational issues. There are others too, and I can say more about those later if the committee would find it helpful. There's ongoing liaison between VSS, the Commissioner and the Department. So there is the HIA support service. Alongside that, we also have a small grant scheme, which is about providing social support for victims and survivors of historical institutional abuse. It's open to any group which is charitable status. Currently, 2 of the 8 groups access that small grant scheme, mainly used for social events, for going to training courses, for hardship grants where somebody's going through a period of significant hardship, and for befriending visits addressing social isolation. That scheme's been in place since 2014. Ministers have agreed to extending it for a further year for the 21-22 year, and during that time we will consult the Commissioner on what the future of that scheme should be. We're conscious that the HIA support service is now in place, which is covering some of the areas that have been covered by the small grant scheme. We're encouraging groups to go first of all to that service, and then, as I say, we want to review during the year how we move forward with the small grant scheme, but it will certainly be in place for this current year. Moving on just to the Redress Board and to the support that is available to people who are making applications for redress. Of course, the committee is familiar with the legislative background to the establishment of the Redress Board, and to the way it's made up, where each panel that's considering an application consists of a judge and 2 members with a health and social care background. That was very much a development that was brought about on foot of representation by the political parties here to the Secretary of State. There is an automatic right of appeal from a panel's assessment. We've set out some of the most up-to-date figures for the Redress Board, and in fact I do have some that I can share later to the end of April. When this paper was prepared, we had the end of March figures. But as you see, a significant number of applications which have been received, those that have been considered by a panel, and I think importantly to note, determinations to the value of over £15 million in the course of the last financial year. That, of course, has taken place against the backdrop of the difficult operating circumstances of the pandemic, and certainly I would want to note just how much effort the board, between the president, the members and its staff, have put into bringing those cases through. We have highlighted in the paper, and I think this is something we may come to in later discussion, but one of the particular challenges for the board is that it relies on other people for information. First of all, you're making sure that you have a complete application. There are certain things which the legislation says need to be submitted with the application, like identity, copies of identity documents and so on. And then the board needs to go to the institution concerned to request any records that they have. So when you add all of that up, and again, I can say something more about this, there are a lot of applications before the board that are waiting for further information before they can be validated and go forward for panel consideration. You'll see there that the board hasn't been sitting on its hands about that. It has undertaken 2 exercises so far this year, reviewing 444 applications that were incomplete or waiting for information. That's resulted in a number of requests going out to solicitors and to third-party organisations to try and bring that information in as soon as possible. The board's had 75 appeal notices. 42 of those have been determined to date. Sir John Gillan, former Court of Appeal judge, who has been sitting to deal with those appeals to help ensure that they're moved forward as quickly as they can be once all the necessary information is submitted. And you'll see a little bit more information about that in the paper. Applicants are entitled to free legal assistance from a solicitor. That was a recommendation of the Hart report. 95% of applicants are taking that up. Another 5% prefer to do things themselves, and that's okay. But it does illustrate how solicitors are playing a critical and important role in the scheme. I don't want to hold the committee back, and I'm conscious there will be questions. The paper does then just go on to set out the position on medical reports, where it's an individual applicant, the board is assisting people to get those reports, whereas through a solicitor, the solicitor arranges them and the board will refund. There's some information on the assistance that there is for people in preparing personal statements, recording their experiences. Most often that's because they want then to bring an application to the Redress Board, but it doesn't have to be. That has been a service that has been much welcomed by the victims and survivors groups. Teresa Toll in the Commissioner's office has been delivering it. It was something that was set up by the interim advocate before. And that will be moving across to VSS to integrate, as Margaret has said, with the other services that are being provided. But it has been something that people have felt has been very valuable. We also recognise that there is a need for support after an application to the board. We have an arrangement with Advice NI for financial advice for people who've received perhaps a substantial amount of money, and we are looking with the Commissioner at how that could be further developed. Finally, I did want to acknowledge, and no doubt we'll discuss it further, that as the committee has observed, there have been concerns and continue to be concerns that victims and survivors have expressed about how the scheme is organised at the moment and running at the moment. A lot of that can come down to communication, and of course we know that a lack of communication can fuel anxiety. The president of the Redress Board, was Justice Huddleston, has met 4 of the victims and survivors groups at the end of March, and I know that was a specific concern for the committee, and I can say more about that. And certainly the board is not coming from the position of thinking of itself perfect in all of this. None of us are. A year on is, we believe, an appropriate time to work with the Commissioner and the Board to look at all aspects of the applicant journey, not just those in the control of the Board. We do want to see what is working well. We want to see where there's scope for improvement. We want to see where there is scope for further support. And necessarily, all of that consideration and conversation would involve engagement with victims and survivors. So, in summary, a significant amount that has happened over the last year in delivering what victims and survivors we recognise have pressed and fought for a long time. We look forward to continuing to engage, because there are certainly further services and further supports and improvements that can be made.
Okay, Gareth, thank you very much for that substantial report. I appreciate that it was good to receive that report. Well, maybe just note, I know it's not your issue, but you mentioned that the report was prepared at the end of April, yet we received it last night in advance of the meeting today. So if it was prepared at the end of April, it would have been nice to have got it last week to be tabled with the papers and get the due consideration. But I certainly know from officials that come in front of us at the committee that it's never necessary. You're certainly not clasping onto it, refusing to pass it over. So I appreciate that there are systems that you must follow. In terms of the Redress Board, I mean, there's no point in hiding away from this. The Redress Board is not functioning to a level that is acceptable by those within the victims and survivors sector. I think it is much more than communication, to be perfectly honest, Gareth, because one thing that's been communicated to us by every sectoral group is that there's problems with the Redress Board. And I know that those groups have also articulated that to the Commissioner. The Commissioner has discussed that with us. So there is quite a movement amongst committee, commissioner and sectoral groups that there are significant problems with the Redress Board. So I think that we will need to maybe really just knock on the head that it's a communication issue, because it's not. And, there's concerns about the speed. People feel that they're looking at a Redress Board that's going to take, for some people, at the current rate, 10 years before there's going to be conclusion. If you look at the numbers that are going through the system at the moment, and then the number of people that need to go through it, there is significant concern about the impersonal nature of the Redress Board, and that's because it's going through a very judicial process through a Redress Board that's part of the justice and court systems, that's headed up by a judge, and it's a president of a board. And that's very traumatic for people that have had a very, 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 very difficult experience, life-shattering experience, and then find themselves in front of a panel having to justify their needs when they've already been through a process that's done that. And then there are concerns about the disparity of awards. And we met with the groups that are telling us there could be somebody from Liverpool on the panel, there could be somebody from London on the panel, somebody from Belfast, and that separately these three people are assessing their claim. So we would be of an opinion that the Redress Board needs a lot more of a more formalised process of a review after 1 year. Is that something that could be envisaged and that could be delivered?
in terms of looking at the experience to date, and absolutely, I'm not shying away from the concerns that have been raised. The victims and survivors groups ring me as well as the commissioner, and certainly I hear these and would want to address them. I think a year into the scheme is a good time to look at how all of the scheme operates, and we have some thoughts on how we might do that we want to talk to the victims and survivors groups and to the commissioner about. I wouldn't want to limit that to the board, because while the board provides a vitally important part of this, it is not the only contributor to the redress scheme. For example, the commissioner has statutory responsibilities for publicising the board, and we're working with her on how best we can do that in an evidence-based way later in the year. And the support that comes from the VSS service is all part of this as well, and there may be more support that could be offered to people at particular points of the client journey. So what we would like to do would be to look at the whole client journey a year on. There may even be bits of the legislation, bits of the rules under which the board operates that need to be looked at as part of that. So we would want to look at the whole client journey. And I say some thoughts on doing that, some thoughts on how we could get some independent input to that. And I would want to discuss those with the victims and survivors groups. But I think just it is important to come back to say that during the pandemic, I sat in a meeting round about the 20th of March last year. It was the morning before Boris Johnson announced the lockdown, and a lot of very clever people said, this can't be done. You can't launch a scheme of this magnitude in a pandemic. 11 days later, we did, and the board has, as I did, delivered £15 million worth of awards. In terms of speed, and I know there was concern about a figure of 10 years, and the commissioner had raised that, I think, kind of multiplying up the number of cases in what has been a very unusual year. I mean, it was really 6 months into the year before cases really started flowing through the system, multiplying that up by figures in the business case. What I would want to say is that as cases, and I have been assured by the board that as cases are coming forward and are ready to be listed, they are being listed. Some of the latest figures, 1387 applications, which I think is the figure that you've seen. 717 of those have been assessed by a panel. That leaves 670. But when you break down the 670, 166 were incomplete, and so the board's gone back to the applicant to get some more information. 158 are waiting for information from the parties and others. So maybe a solicitor has said, we want to get a medical report, and that's being waited for. And 109 that are waiting for information from institutions under Rule 9. Then there were 100, these were the end of April figures, there were 134 that were due to be heard during May, that were scheduled to be listed during May. So in terms of what you might say was a backlog, there were only actually 94 cases that were waiting to be listed, and another 9 that at the end of April that had been received, and we're just going through the clerical processes. So I do want to set it in that context. Equally, when victims and survivors are saying we are not happy, obviously it behoves us to look at all of that. And as I say, I would like to do that in a joined up way across the whole of the client journey.
Okay, well look, we'll continue our conversations on that, Gareth. You may want to do it that way. I think we may want you to focus more on redress and the redress board and the redress board process. But at this stage, we may just need to both draw our lines in the ground there and continue with discussions to see how we can achieve what the sector are asking us for. I'm going to pass now to Doug Beattie as the Vice Chair. If we get Doug up into the spotlight there, Doug, I'll pass to yourself.
Thanks, Chair. Gareth, thank you for your very thorough answers, I have to say, and I don't have a great deal of questions for you, but just something that was raised a number of months ago, and I don't think we ever bottomed it out. When you talk about the grant scheme earlier on, did we ever bottom out any chance of getting a funeral fund for those who came to a position where they maybe passed away before they got a settlement from Redress, or indeed got a redress and then used and were of ill health and kept that money for a funeral? Did we ever bottom that out?
It has been something that has been discussed further over the last few months, Doug. And by the way, can I say congratulations on your new appointment? No, it has certainly been discussed, and let me explain the difficulty that we have within TEO. Now, funeral costs were not part of the HART recommendations. That's not to say they're not an issue, but they weren't something that were raised by Judge Hart. Clearly, victims and survivors have been advocating for the costs of funerals to be funded. Funeral costs and funeral grants are really first and foremost something in the social security system, which would be a matter for the Department for Communities. And the Commissioner, the Interim Advocate Commissioner, certainly had engaged with them. When you hear the stories, it is impossible not to be moved. The people who have died in difficult circumstances, people who have been supported to a huge degree by members of the victims and survivors groups as they came towards the end of their lives, and the desire to give people a decent burial. The issue for us in the Executive Office is that if we were to set a precedent for one group, for this group of victims and survivors, and there may be lots of other groups of needy people who could bring an argument for further help with funeral costs, we're setting a difficult precedent, and so we have found it difficult to find a way of moving forward on this. Coming out of discussion with the Commissioner, one thing that we do want to look at, and I understand the Commissioner will be looking at, is might there be some alternative source of funding or support? Might there be a trust fund? I know there are trust funds that pay for, if someone dies overseas, pay for the body to be repatriated. Is there some trust fund that might be able to access that would get us around some of these issues? And that's really the next line of inquiry. Obviously, as more redress awards go out and people have more resources, then I would like to think that's a further help, and it becomes more of an issue. But there are more inquiries, I think, to be made about it. But I do want to be honest just about the difficulties that we've had.
And I get them difficulties, Gareth, and I'm not gonna labour it. I mean, I think I've just raised the point, and I don't really care what it's called, whether it's called a trust fund or a funeral fund. But a survivor who has recounted their story, who's going through a process, and who passes away penniless before that redress gets to fruition in any shape or form, to me, there's a duty for us to make sure that they are buried properly and funding is made available. Because see, if we don't, do you know who funds it? All of the other people who are in that group. They're chipping in and they're funding this, and it's a small amount of money. We're not saying it's for everybody. We're talking about there's a very small amount of people who either get a redress outcome and then they keep that money because they need to keep it for their own funeral, or they pass away before they get through the process. But I mean, if you're going to look at it, I understand the difficulties. And it might be seen as a trivial point in the great scheme of things. And I think I'm with Colin in the redress issue that we feel that's here. But it's just a small point that if we could bottom it out, I'd be happy enough. And if we have to maybe take evidence on that from the survivors, it might be worthwhile doing that also. But listen, thanks, Gareth. You can come back if you wish, but you don't have to. But thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Doug. If I could bring Pat up into the spotlight next, and we'll get a question from Pat. So it's over to yourself.
Thanks, Colin, and thanks for your answer so far, Gareth. Gareth, I wanted to ask you about the discussions that TEO was holding with the institutions, and can you give us an update on what progress there has been thus far? Thanks.
Yeah. We have long said, and the Hart Report has acknowledged, that there is a responsibility on the institutions who were found to have had significant failings, systemic failings in all of this, to contribute to the costs of the redress. Ministers met with the two archbishops, with Archbishop Martin and Archbishop McDowell, with representatives from Barnardo's and with the Association of Leaders of Missionaries and Religious of Ireland on the 9th of February to discuss this and to discuss more widely the remaining Hart recommendations, including the apology and memorial. It was a broad-based agenda. We talked to them about the progress that there'd been on redress payments and the amounts that were being paid out. We talked about the provision of services to victims and survivors. We talked about the apology and the role that the institutions would play in that. And we talked about the principles that needed to inform the talks that we would have on contributions from the institutions. Those principles would include an open book approach on the part of the institutions. They would include things that Judge Hart recognised were fair, like you shouldn't have to pay twice for the same case, fair enough. They included a lot of focus on fairness and transparency as we moved forward. And a positive thing which came out of that engagement was that everyone agreed that acceptance of responsibility and recognition of the harm done were central to the way forward. The next step on this will be that we will have a roundtable meeting, which ministers will be facilitating with the institutions themselves. That first meeting was kind of at a higher level with the archbishops and AMRI, but with the institutions themselves. There was a suggestion that it might be profitable to have an independent facilitator for these talks, and that is something that we've been thinking about. Ministers will be considering. But no, we need to move quickly to this next stage, and that will be a round table. After that, then we'll break up into individual talks with each of the institutions. Just one thing I would say, and not this doesn't take away from the possibility of or the desirability of early payments or payments on account, or starting to see the institution stepping up to the mark in financial terms. But we are conscious that in the South they agreed all of this with the institutions at the start of the process, and then found that the redress cost many times more than was originally anticipated, and had to go back a second time, which really hasn't been terribly satisfactory. So I think there's something about keeping the talks open until we have some certainty about what the total cost of this scheme is going to be, but that doesn't mean not starting them soon, nor does it mean not looking at all the possibilities for some money to start flowing in.
Okay, and I'm going to steal Trevor Lund's usual question when this issue is raised. Has it ever been established whether or not the institutions had insurance cover?
That is something that we will be exploring again when we meet in the round table, and it's very much on the agenda for that. I know the committee took a significant interest. I had, in earlier discussions where I had asked the question, I'd been told no, but we will want to make absolutely sure that that is the answer. We want to make absolutely sure that there isn't some insurance we could be calling on, and I know that this is Trevor's background, so the message has been well received on that.
Okay, thanks for that. And just in terms of a timeline for these conversations, negotiations, do you have a timeline for when they might be concluded?
As I say, in terms of concluding, no, because there is something about keeping open until we're clearer on the flow of applications. And there hasn't been a big publicity campaign yet, and that's something we might want to talk about separately. But in terms of next steps, an early roundtable and then into the one-to-one negotiations with the institutions, potentially with the appointment of a facilitator to work with us, and frankly to challenge both sides in all of this as we go through.
Okay, thanks for that. And just, Chair, if you'll indulge me, one other question on another issue. When the Commissioner was in with us some weeks ago, Fiona Ryan, she indicated that there should be a direct line between victims and survivors and the Redress Board. Do you know if any work has commenced on establishing that link? Thanks.
Yes, and absolutely, there should be that direct link in. Before the Redress Board became operational, the staff that had been assigned to it held engagement events with victims and survivors groups. Now, a year on, of course, in the light of experience, there are new points to be made, and that's fine. But there was engagement with the board that started at that stage. And I know that one of the early things that Mr. Justice Colton, as the previous president, did was to meet with the victims and survivors groups. The new president has met with the groups. Mr. Justice Huddleston has met with the groups, 4 of the groups who wanted to meet on the 31st of March. I am assured by the board that it has responded to any request from the victims and survivors groups to have a meeting. I understand from the Commissioner that there's a couple of groups would like to meet again in the near future. So that direct link with the groups has been established.
I'm not even so sure it's a matter of the board meeting the groups. I know that victims themselves have been dissatisfied at the information they've been receiving from the board about where their case actually sits and issues like that. And they're dependent on their legal representatives communicating with the board and there may be difficulties, and I'm not in any way criticising the solicitors for the victims, but I mean, they obviously have other workloads as well. So I suppose, you're almost talking about a helpline that victims can phone where they can get information directly from the board. And I'll stand corrected on that, Chair, if I picked Fiona Ryan up wrong, but I was assuming it was some sort of line like that where victims could get information from the board. Do you want to come in on that, Colin?
I would need to go back and check that myself, Pat, but if Gareth has any clarity on that, it would be appreciated.
And maybe just I've picked the question up wrongly, and certainly that is something that we've heard from victims and survivors. Now, as I said at the start, solicitors have got a very important role to play in all of this. And when somebody comes in through a solicitor, the solicitor is the representative. And the normal way of working is that communication is through the solicitor. There's a smaller number of people who make direct applications, and the board will then be in touch with them directly about their application and keep them up to date. Now, this has been a difficult year for solicitors' practices and for everybody else. I think this is certainly one of the things that we want to look at in the course of I'm talking about this examination of how things are working a year on. It is a point that we've heard from victims and survivors, and it's what options might there be that on the one hand respect the role of solicitors, which is important, but on the other hand, I mean, there is a reality that victims and survivors sometimes, what I've heard is sometimes people just are not quite sure what way to turn, don't know what way to turn, and that's not a good thing.
Sorry for cutting across you. I'm just wondering if it would be out of order of me to suggest that officials make contact with the Commissioner and try to establish exactly what it is that victims need, because she was talking about a direct line into the Redress Board, and if something could be organised along those lines. Thanks.
Right. No, I say that point is familiar. Just when you were talking about a direct line, I think I was thinking about something else. No. Part of what we're thinking for the way forward is bringing together board, commissioner, ourselves, VSS, looking at each stage of the client journey, looking at what the issues are, and looking at what can be done. And communications would be a key bit of that. So, looking at that is certainly on the agenda.
Okay, thanks for that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, if we could bring Martina up into the spotlight next, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gareth. And obviously language is important because a lot of the victims and survivors are listening in here today. And there's an urgent need for the Historical Institutional Abuse Redress Board to operate within a trauma-informed perspective. The information I've received, and maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, if it's not the reality, that awards are being made based on how much detail is included in applications. Because, Gareth, if that is the case, then that fails to consider the effect that trauma can have on memory. And some victims and survivors, we know, block it out and are simply reluctant to go back to the place to remember the abuse. Indeed, we also know for many of them, recounting these experiences can be re-traumatizing. So the Redress Board needs to operate within a trauma-informed framework. And if they are not doing that, can we get the Redress Board to operate within such a framework? And what is your understanding of the application and how the awards are made?
Well, if there are particular points around how the board should and could be more responsive to the trauma that people have experienced, I'm sure they would be content to hear those and to consider them. But in terms of awards, as I said earlier, each of the panels that's considering an award consists of a judge and 2 people with a health and social care background. And this was something, if you go back to the Hart report, it was just the judge. This was something that survivors groups lobbied for, the political parties took up, and it was agreed by the Secretary of State in the hiatus with the executive. I was myself involved in interviewing those people who were appointed. And I have to say, was impressed by their understanding of childhood trauma. I mean, they were all people who were coming from backgrounds where they had dealt with children's services, with children experiencing trauma, aware of the effects that could have throughout life. So I think the fact that there are those members there is important. In terms of awards, yeah.
Can I just ask you, Chair, I'm sorry for cutting across you, but I just want to pick up on that point. So just for clarity and to avoid doubt, are you telling me that then it's not based on an application of what's written in an application, that's not what the award is based upon, that account is taken given the experience of those who are carrying out the assessment of these applications, that they are bringing with them that trauma-informed perspective to the assessment of those applications?
Yeah, well, ultimately the board has to work with the information that's in front of it, and we would encourage people to put as much information as they can before the board. But there are certainly plenty of cases where the board has gone back and has asked for further information, or has asked for a particular kind of report or medical report, maybe a report from a specialist in mental health, with a view of operating to the principle of trying to do what is fair for victims and survivors. There was, I'm conscious, just previously there was a concern raised about disparity of awards. The board does publish the guidance on the levels of award, and that's published on the website. Now, it is in bands because within bands all the individual aspects need to be taken into account. I know that the members of the board and staff have also had training about trauma, specific training about trauma and the impact that can have. Now, I mean, if there is some detail or evidence that isn't in an application and there is no hint that that's something that the board should be pursuing, that's going to be very difficult. And something that maybe we can do in those cases is the service that's available now in VSS that has been with the Commissioner about helping people, not in any kind of legal situation, but in a supportive situation, helping people get their experience down on paper, and they then have something that they can take to a solicitor. So I could say absolutely there is an awareness of trauma-informed practice, though ultimately the board is going to need something to go on in making a decision.
Of course, that is the case. But Gareth, we as members of this committee, individually and collectively, are hearing from victims and survivors about being traumatised, re-traumatised by their experience of their engagement with the Redress Board. So we all want to get this right. We all want to take care of those victims and survivors. God knows they went through enough. And none of us want to hear about them being re-traumatised. So I think it's important that, in what has been said earlier, that the Redress Board, the officials, VSS, but particularly listening and hearing to the needs of victims and survivors so that we can get this right. Because in my assessment of what I've been hearing for the last year, we haven't done that yet. This has not been done to service the needs of victims and survivors, this being the Redress Board. So we need to acknowledge what we're hearing, and we need to put in place practices and procedures that is going to better protect the victims and survivors. And we cannot have a system in place that results in them being re-traumatised. And I think if there's a takeaway from this meeting today, it's a collective understanding from everyone, I believe, in our committee. It's a concern that we have about victims and survivors being re-traumatised by their engagement with the Redress Board. That must stop.
Victims and survivors are absolutely at the centre of all of this. When you start to recall experiences that you had in the past, trauma that you suffered, experienced in the past, I mean, that can of itself be re-traumatizing. But anything that we can do to minimize that, and I mean, I firmly believe that the board and the president, just like the commissioner and all of us, I mean, that ultimately is, we don't want to see victims and survivors re-traumatized if we can help it. I should add that the Redress Board had asked me for contact details for the committee, so I understand that they would be the president wants to reach out in the very near future to the committee and see if there's something that could be done directly, whether it was a meeting or whether it was perhaps inviting the chair, the deputy chair, to meet some members of the wider board. So I know he is looking to reach out so that he, alongside, so that he and the board can hear more about and can address those concerns.
Well, unless he's deaf and they're deaf, I'm sure they've heard all of us in the committee raise our concerns, but it'll be up to the chair and the vice chair in the committee to see how that should be taken forward. Can I just have one other question, please, Chair? And it's to ask the department what you're doing to ensure that the victims and survivors who live in Britain no longer have their benefits cut due to these awards. Now, I know this is not within your remit, but I'm asking if there's representation being made on their behalf.
Yes, very much so. And the First Minister and Deputy First Minister have lobbied on this at ministerial level. I'm pleased to say that our latest discussions with the Department of Work and Pensions have been very positive. We're now working with them jointly to prepare the business case which needs to go to Treasury on this. Once that is done, then they will be able to change their regulations, but in the meantime we'll be able to apply an administrative disregard. So we're certainly making good progress on that, and I would like to think that we would have positive news to share with victims and survivors very soon.
Okay, Martina, happy enough. Look, before I bring Trevor Lunn in, something just, I want maybe just to iron out something there, Gareth, that you've said, that that the political parties and the sectoral groups, representative groups, that they were happy with the judge and then the other healthcare professionals that were on those panels. Now, my recollection may not be entirely goes back the full length of this. I was sort of late to the party, just being involved in some of the negotiations about 3 years ago in this. But as I understand it, the concern and the problem that the political parties had was that there was too heavy an influence of the judicial world in these panels. And in fact, the problem that we're having now, even with that judicial influence being watered down, the concern and the problem seems to be about the judicial influence and oversight that there is for that. So again, I think there's a pattern that is emerging there, that the political parties and the representative groups were unhappy with the maybe overbearing influence of a judicial process in this. There has been a softening of that, but that still is of concern. And I think you're right, it does come in communication, and sometimes the way things are communicated, the fact that, you know, the president of the board needs to get contact details for us. You know, we're in that big white house way up at the top of a hill. I don't think there's many people that really struggle to find out where we are. But if that's a struggle for somebody to have to go and find out where the contact information is for us, it just shows how we can all exist in our own little bubbles. But I want to bring Trevor in now for if he would like to come in and ask some questions there.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thank you, Gareth, for your report so far, and thanks to Pat Shane for asking my question. Just to pursue the question of contribution and who actually pays here, I think that may be clear, but it's absolutely right, excuse me, that the Redress Board has taken this on, and I'm glad to see the progress that you're making. It may not be perfect, but nothing very seldom is. So we look forward to the rest of the scheme. It's going to go on for a very long number of years, I think. But on the question of liability, and here I go back to insurance again, you seem to have had some fairly civilised discussions with particularly the two churches in Barnardo's, and they appear to have accepted some responsibility in this area. But I can't help thinking we're not pursuing this quite as vigorously as we perhaps should, because if this was a normal situation, let's say, put it that way, and the Redress Board is paying out money, it would have a right of recovery against the institutions who actually bore the liability for what happened. And whether or not they have insurance, in a way it's academic, they have liability. They have responsibility. So can you expand a wee bit further, perhaps, on the amount of discussion, the amount of pressure, the amount of investigation that's going on to get them to accept that they have a liability or major liability? Because if this process that we're involved in didn't exist, they would be getting sued every day now by victims. Of course they would. And who knows what awards they might get. So as I said, it's good that the government is taking it on, but I think we need to look to the public purse as well to see what recoveries can be made.
Ministers and officials both have been absolutely clear with the institutions, and that goes back to discussions that were being had with them even before I came into this job, that there is a responsibility, moral and otherwise, to make contributions and to bear some of the cost. It should not all fall on the public purse. So that is absolutely the basis where we're working from and has long been emphasised. While it is good to have a working relationship with the institutions, and we've managed to maintain that, the devil will be in the detail of this. It has been important and significant that the institutions have committed and have acknowledged that they have a role to play, but it's when we get down to pounds, shillings and pence, that you know, I think that's when the difficulties are going to come. In terms of any legal positions, we will have a lawyer and I'm expecting there will be a QC there as well, who will be supporting us as a department as we go through this. So we're very alive to the legal aspects, and we're also looking at what financial input, accounting input, and so on that we might need, so that we're up to speed on the financial issues. I mean, we absolutely intend to press this. Now, there are justifiable points that the institutions will make about the services that they've already provided, the cases that they've already paid out on. Okay, take account of those, and Judge Hart said it would be important to do that. But no, it is something we're absolutely committed to. The priority has been to get the redress scheme in, to get the support services in, to get the commissioner in, focused on victims and survivors. But really, the next priority is now the other side of the equation, which is the institutions. Just more generally, and Chair, going back to what you said, each member of the panel has got one vote. That is in the legislation, and we've seen the involvement of the non-judicial members, not just at panel level, but the Redress Board has got a management board that sits regularly, that works on policies and procedures and governance and so on. And the non-judicial members are also represented on that board. So there has been an effort to involve them at all levels of decision making.
Chair, just before I go, I'm sorry to belabor the point, Gareth. I didn't disagree with anything you said in response to my question. That's fair enough. But in terms of insurance, there's a golden rule about liability insurance. The customer doesn't admit liability and they don't admit that they have insurance. That's standard practice. It's in the policy. You just don't do those things. So I think the point at which you will find out if these institutions have some insurance cover available is when you ask them for the money. You'll either get a response from them or you'll get a response from whatever insurance company is involved. Yeah. But I'll leave it at that. I think the work you're doing is great.
Thank you, Trevor, and that will be one of the questions that I will be asking Council as we start on this about insurance. It's been helpful to have your input on that, and we will certainly raise it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I ask maybe for George and Emma to be brought up into the spotlight, and we'll just do a little check on final points or questions. George, would you have anything there you want to?
Yes, Chair. Three or four questions here for Gareth, and thank Gareth for his presentation. The first question I have is how many staff, full-time or part-time, is taken on this mammoth task, and very worthwhile task as well, may I say. And where are they housed? And Gareth keeps referring to the institutions. Could I ask, maybe I shouldn't be asking, but who are the institutions? And have they reached, or what might be the estimated full cost for the full compensation situation? Maybe that's an unfair question to ask, but I'll ask it anyway. I don't mean any disrespect. It's good to see that these people, at long last, the victims and survivors are being compensated. I'm totally in complete support of it. Thanks, Chair.
Happy to answer those questions, Chair. In terms of staff, there are 34 staff in the Redress Board who are working on this. We will certainly keep that complement under review. In fact, over the last few months, I approved a couple of additional legal staff to support getting cases ready for panels, and there was another member of staff that I'd or another staffing change that I'd agreed. So that's certainly something we keep under review. But 34 staff, they are based in the headline building at the kind of Corporation Street, top of Waring Street, there in Belfast, so a fairly central location, but have been doing a great deal of their work virtually in the same way as the committee, and that's been a necessity over the last while. In terms of the full costs, the business case that we put together on this, I have to say, I mean, not having huge amounts of information because there was never any definitive list of people who were residing in the homes run by the institutions. The business case had a range of estimates for total cost, which ranged from about 140 million through a central estimate up into the 400s of millions, up to an upper estimate above 600 million. And I think one of the things that will need to be considered with the Commissioner is publicity, because we recognise that while the number of applications received has been substantial, compared with the numbers of young people who went through these homes, maybe particularly the homes that came in for special criticism from Hart, were much greater, and we want to see how we can bring those applications in. And I can certainly give you the names of the institutions. These are the 6 that Hart found to have had systemic failings. That's De La Salle, the Sisters of Nazareth, Bernardo's, the Sisters of St. Louis, the Irish Church Missions, and the Good Shepherd Sisters.
Thank you very much, Gareth. Thank you.
Okay, Emma, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A lot of what I had, sort of the queries or questions that I had have been covered in the debate, and I would echo the remarks of others around the importance for communication with victims and survivors around redress particularly, and obviously the concerns have been raised by others. I know that in a previous presentation I had raised the sort of concern around members or victims that are no longer resident of the North, and how this can negatively impact on benefits that they're receiving if they do receive redress, that can be means tested and impact on housing benefit or other things that they might be getting. So if there was an update on that specific point, and that's it for myself. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Well, in terms of Great Britain and victim survivors who are living there, as I noted earlier, we've been having talks with the Department of Work and Pensions, and those have been positive, and we're moving forward on that. In terms of people living in other jurisdictions, there's not really anything we can do because we don't have the levers to pull, and benefit systems, tax systems may vary. I know in a number of jurisdictions, compensation is disregarded, certainly for tax purposes, and there will be some sort of disregard for benefits purposes, but unfortunately that's where it would need to be representations that were being made to the governments there in terms of how these payments were treated.
Okay, that's grand. Look, I think Martina Anderson would have just a quick question that she wants to ask. So if we can bring Martina back in again.
Yeah, and it's a follow-up of just what you responded to Emma there, because of what you also had said to me earlier in relation to those survivors in Britain. So can I ask you, is there an administrative disregard in place now as a safety net for survivors in Britain to offer them some kind of protection for loss of pending, for loss of finances that they may get pending some kind of legislative change? Because I thought what you said to Emma might have been a little bit different to my understanding.
Yes, no, it's not an administrative disregard as such, but what the Department of Work and Pensions has done is that any cases that have come to their attention, they have parked. So they haven't tried to recover anything. They've held them until the policy issue is set out. And I understand there have been a couple of cases falling into that category.
Okay, so we may need to get an update on that, Chair, pending any legislative changes or the representation that the Joint First Ministers are making, hopefully to iron that out. But that's important for those survivors who are living in Britain.
Okay, thanks for that, Martina. I'm just going to finally check Trevor Clark, just in case we're not getting your the raised hand there. Just if you have anything that you wanted to ask.
No, I'm fine there, Chair.
You're okay, perfect. That's grand. Thank you very much. Look, Gareth, thank you very much to you and your colleagues today. We appreciate this is a very complex issue. It's been long running. Obviously, once it's up and running, there will be identified areas that we can improve on. So I'm glad that we're all able to articulate them to each other and hopefully progress with them to find some changes to help everything going forward. But thank you for your attendance here today.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. So we'll just do a jig round then if we bring members up into the spotlight, and we can... Is there any issues that anybody wants to raise on the back of that? We get some confirmation on matters there, but certainly we had discussed the possibility of a committee motion about developing a request for a specific review of the redress process. Is that still something that members think is relevant and that we should progress with?
Yes, Chair, I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, we could do that.
And Chair, I think the point that was made about the redress board, I think it will come in front of all the committee. If that's an opportunity, I know they talked about perhaps meeting the chair and the vice chair, but I do think we need to try to get a number of people around the table together, collaborating, whether it's both officials, the redress board, SSN, and the victims and survivors, as opposed to those maybe just advocating for them. They need to be in the room to co-design this process, because there's a problem with the redress board and it doesn't seem to be getting addressed other than being called out, and we need to do more than that.
Yeah, actually, and what I think is actually really highlights the purpose and role of this committee is that we actually as a committee are the only ones that have probably met each and every sector right the way through and actually had a question and answer session. So we, from our view, can see that there are issues that maybe others aren't aware of. So I think us being able to progress that would be very, very useful. Okay, members, thank you for that. That was it was a long session there because we started early, but it's appreciated that we've got through that. If members are happy, we can move on then to the next item. We're going to move on then to item 7, which is the SR 2021-114, the Department's Transfer of Functions Order, Northern Ireland 2021. If I can refer members to pages 49 to 63 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers that are there, and also refer you to the tabled pack for the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules, which found no issues with this rule. The Committee for Justice and the Committee for Infrastructure have both responded to inform the committee that they are content with the statutory rule as well. And the committee considered the SL1 on the 21st of October and was content that a statutory rule be made. There have been no changes since the SL1 was submitted. So therefore, can I seek agreement that the Committee for the Executive Office has considered SR 2021/114, the Department's Transfer Functions Order Northern Ireland 2021, and recommends that it be affirmed in the Assembly? Martina?
Not wanting to do anything at all to stop this passage. We need to get accelerated passage. But Chair, I do think there is an issue as to, and I've been saying this all year since I've been in MLA, as to how we ended up with staff in one department and the authority in another department. And this is where this has been now required, this legislative process to change that. It should never have happened. Yeah. And it's okay people saying we are where we are. This is not to stop this journey, but I do believe we need an explanation as to how we ended up with the authority and responsibility in one department and the staff sitting in another department without that responsibility.
Okay, well, we'll certainly write and ask for that, Martina, and that won't prevent this from progressing, which is what we need, but we can certainly write and ask for that explanation. Can I just check then that there's nobody that disagrees with that SR, that we're all happy with it?
Great.
And that we will ask for the and the background as to how we got to the situation and where we were. Okay, members, item 8 is SR 2021-113, the Public Services Ombudsman Act, Northern Ireland 2016, Commencement Order, Northern Ireland 2021. Pages 65 to 127 of the meeting pack are the relevant papers. Now, there was no statutory requirement to lay the rule, but it is being laid as a matter of good practice in order to ensure the transparency and accessibility that would be good and proper in progressing these. So could I get agreement that the Committee for the Executive Office has considered SR 2021-113, the Public Services Ombudsman Act, Northern Ireland 2016, Commencement Order, Northern Ireland 2021, and is content with the rule? Okay, I think people are happy enough with that. The next stage then is for our committee to engage with the Ombudsman on a statement of principles on the handling of complaints to help us progress that to the next stage. So thank you, members, for that. Item 9 is the Forward Work Programme, which is on page 129 of the meeting pack. Just a few juggle around dates. It was proposed, or we're certainly proposing, to move the briefing on June monitoring to the 9th of June in view of a delay in the monitoring process. That should allow us to take a briefing from departmental officials on the Urban Villages and Communities in Transition programme, and we've scheduled that in on the 2nd of June in place of the June monitoring. Would members be happy enough with that? I know we discussed that last week. We also agreed to seek papers from stakeholders in advance of the concurrent meeting with the Department for Finance, which is scheduled for the 16th of June. So can I get agreement that we maybe would go to the stakeholders from the High Street Task Force session on the 3rd of March and write to the Committee for the Economy and Finance for a list of stakeholders from whom they wish to request papers? Members be happy enough to get that information? Okay. And if we could schedule a stakeholder session with groups representing victims of historical institutional abuse, if we could schedule that for the 23rd of June with a view to informing a committee motion which would be about the review of the Redress Board. And I would try and work with the business committee to try and schedule those that they fall in order. Would members be agreeable with that? Okay, thank you very much. That allows us to move on to item 10, which is correspondence. There are 7 items of correspondence on pages 135 to 161. On page 10.6, at page 158, there is correspondence from the House of Lords European Affairs Subcommittee on the Protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland, requesting engagement with the Committee for the Executive Office. So they're looking to have an informal chat by phone first to be able to schedule some sort of work between the two committees. So would members be happy if I speak to them and then come back to you and update you on what it is that they would like to progress that, and we can schedule something with them in the future?
Yep.
Okay, then page 160, item 10.7, there's correspondence from the Community Relations in School. Schools regarding the urban villages and community in transition. We do have a space. My memory's not going to allow me to remember when it was. So, Michael, I'm going to defer to your encyclopedic memory. When did we say we would have some space for them?
On the 2nd of June, because we had urban villages then and the letters about urban villages as well.
Okay, so on the 2nd of June, we can also, we have space for them because of the reorganisation, and that would allow us to have some update from them. Would members be happy to receive that presentation from them? Okay.
Chair, just can I say that I have been engaging with this issue, and the year-to-year funding is really problematic. So just to support what you've been saying, but just to call out, because they have been actually very good at alerting many of us to the problems that they are receiving and trying to take the work that they're doing forward.
Okay, certainly not a problem, Martina, and certainly they wrote to us on the back of engagement with yourself, and that's why we thought it would be good to get the presentation in where we had space from them. Also, maybe just to let members know that we are fairly tight now between now and the summer recess, but if there are members that members would be interested in exploring, if they could let the clerk know before the end of June so that there's some time to schedule those into the autumn, but we're fairly tight with a couple of presentations each day now between now and the end of June. Okay, item 11 is any other business. Is there anything else that anybody wants to raise there?
Can I come in, Chair? It's just to understand, because I know it was one of the legislative procedures we were dealing with there with SRs, but the Complaint Standards Authority, when you mentioned them coming before us, because there's a number of issues I would mind probing there, is that on our schedule? Because when you talked about a packed agenda and whatever, because I thought we were going to be dealing with that today, I misunderstood. But I wouldn't mind an opportunity to some of and scrutinise some of that a bit further.
Okay, I'll bring Michael in there. My understanding now is that the next stage is to engage with them regarding the statement of principles for going forward. So I presume that will involve us. What would be the process for that engagement, Michael?
Yes, I assume the Ombudsman would come and meet the committee and talk about that statement of principles, and then we would have a motion in the Assembly to approve that.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other business? Okay, that allows us then to say that that's the meeting concluded for today. The date, time and place of the next meeting will be next Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and again virtually by Starleaf. So that's us all finished up, guys. Thank you very much indeed for the meeting today. Okay, Michael, thank you.
Is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.